What happens when the best tool to fight fraud is the very same kind of technology powering the fraudsters? Is fighting AI with AI the solution, or a risk in itself?
The main thing with Agentic AI is it's not just about answering questions, it's about taking actions. So it's a pretty big leap forward in what AI can do, meaning it uses some of the technologies from supervised machine learning and some of the technologies from generative AI to understand both structured and unstructured data and be able to take actions against that. Agents are going to be like paralegals, and it turns every investigator into a lawyer. So rather than going out and compiling all this information and doing all this research, they can come in and redline, make decisions, connect dots that the paralegal may have missed, and ultimately make a decision faster.
Hello and welcome to What the Fraud, a podcast from Sumsub where financial fraudsters meet their match. I'm Thomas Traniak, currently responsible for some of our very exciting partnerships here at Sumsub, a global verification platform helping to verify users, businesses, and transactions as well. Today, we're unpacking the challenges at the heart of Agentic AI. And joining me is Will Lawrence, CEO and co-founder of Greenlite AI, whose company has actually built AI agents designed to spot fraud and streamline compliance for both banks and fintechs. So, Will, great to have you here today on What the Fraud.
Oh, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure is all ours. I have a couple of questions to kick off today's episode. Will, I mean, it's a timely conversation with everything going on at the moment because billions is being invested into Agentic AI from many different, let's say, use cases hailing from many different sources. And of course, hailed by many as the next frontier financial services compliance. But before we get into the details, Will, for those who might not be familiar, actually, what exactly is Agentic AI? How is it already, let's say, changing the way that we tackle fraud?
Definitely. So really excited to be here. And I'll unpack this by giving a few stories here that might be helpful. First off, as a quick introduction for me, I'm Will, CEO and co-founder of Greenlite. Prior to Greenlite, I used to work on the product team focused on anti-money laundering and financial crime over at Facebook, now Meta. So AI has been around in our space of fraud and financial crime for a very long time. But when we talked about AI 15 years ago, it was referring to a different technology. Generally speaking, that was focused on machine learning, and more specifically, a form of machine learning called supervised machine learning, where it's all about crunching a lot of data points to help you understand if this new transaction or this new ID that you're seeing is a fraudulent or there's any issues with that document or transaction or ID. But the key part of that is it's really a predictive engine using data. And we might have called that AI about 10 or so years ago. In 2023, we started to see generative AI. Generative AI was really interesting. This is like the ChatGPTs of the world because ultimately what it helps you do is understand unstructured data and create unstructured data. To be a little bit more precise there, what was really cool about ChatGPT is you can talk to it in human language or upload documents or take a picture of something, and it can understand it really quickly and be able to respond to you in what we call an unstructured way with novel text that previously wasn't very structured. So it's a really exciting technology, generative AI. And where we saw that used in like our fraud and financial crime world was really in like summarizing documents or summarizing cases and helping us write things like narratives. Now, Agentic AI is kind of the next version. All of these kind of go under the umbrella of AI. And the main thing with Agentic AI is it's not just about answering questions, it's about taking actions. So it's a pretty big leap forward in what AI can do, meaning it uses some of the technologies from supervised machine learning and some of the technologies from generative AI to understand both structured and unstructured data and be able to take actions against that. That's what's really exciting. We're no longer just helping and summarizing and describing, it's actually being able to take those actions. And if you go one layer down into the technology stack, what does that mean to take actions? It's really using some of the amazing things in generative AI world, understanding unstructured data and taking unstructured actions, but doing that in a sequential way. A simple example of this might be, I might ask ChatGPT, like, what's my favorite recipe or something like that, or write a story for my daughter. It would be able to answer that question for you. But in Agentic world, what you might say is like, publish a story for my daughter on my website. And then we'll do several steps of tasks. So we'll write the story, maybe then create a website, maybe figure out your DNS and hosting, go ahead and upload it to your domain platform of choice, maybe design the website, then publish the article. So it's just a lot more action-oriented, which is really exciting. And you can there's so much we can go into from there, but you can see why that's such an exciting new technology for the world of fraud and financial crime.
Definitely going to be opening a lot of doors, Will, for people. But of course, with those sort of decision-making steps being made, especially by an agent, there needs to be, let's say, roadblocks, not roadblocks, but bumps in the way to make sure that that agent is making decisions on behalf of a human, which has actually verified themselves and the actions that they do want to take, right? I mean, we're seeing agentic AI discussed more and more in the context, of course, of fraud prevention and verification at the same time. I mean, from the perspective of your work previously at Meta, but also more now at Greenlight, how is actually Greenlight putting it to work for clients in the scope of agentic AI? And what kinds of problems are you helping to solve within the remit that traditional tools maybe couldn't at the start?
So if we look at any fraud, compliance, or risk department, there's the teams that are defining what is our tolerance for certain risky activities, or what does our regulators define us as requiring to do in certain geographies. There's the policy teams broadly, but then there's always the operations teams. So fraud operations, risk operations, compliance operations. And if you zoom into what the operational teams are doing at scale, they're really tackling repeated events in a fairly scaled way. Generally speaking, these might be standard operating procedures for completing a fraud investigation or reviewing an ID or completing an anti-money laundering investigation. If we go a layer deeper, what's in those operating procedures, right? It might be things like reviewing transactions, reviewing documents, doing research. I lay it out that way because what Agentic AI today is very good at is following standard operating procedures in a very auditable and high throughput way. And so I challenge anyone who's listening here, like, oh, think about your program today. Where do you have operating procedures and people doing repeated steps? That's where Agentic AI is going to be very, very helpful. At Greenlight, we spend a lot of our time in the world of financial crime. So very common examples of what a Greenlight agent is doing in production every single day is reviewing anti-money laundering transaction monitoring alerts, right? Transaction gets flagged for potential criminal activities. Your team has the operating procedures for how you want to review them. You can now use an AI to do that at scale. Similarly, we do a lot on high-risk customer reviews. Let's say you onboarded this complicated institution from a part of the world that you deem to be high risk. You're probably going to need to do incremental review steps against them. That's the type of thing a Greenlight agent is really skilled at. And there's a couple different advantages. The first one here is just a faster response. In that example of an institutional customer onboarding, you might be able to close it out in 5, 10, 20 minutes versus the 6-hour SLA that your team currently has. That's a good example of one value driver. The second one here is just like increased auditability. One thing that's nice about an agent, it will log every step it does. I opened the browser. I went to Google. I searched this string on Google. I found this 6 results on Google. When humans are doing that investigation, they don't have the time to do it, frankly, to log every single step.
To make notes all the way through.
100%. The auditability can go up. And the final one here is it can be just more efficient. You can get more investigations or reviews in a given hour. So that's what's really exciting. And that's where teams are often using Greenlight today for those types of standard operating procedure execution in a financial crime program.
Wonderful to hear. I mean, there are also, beyond, of course, triaging and all of these other scopes of the agentic AI agent as well. I mean, there's a scope for actually spotting subtle fraud signs that previously humans couldn't actually look into, right? I mean, from that perspective, what are these subtle fraud signs which otherwise humans would miss that agentic AI at Greenlight could spot?
So I think the main thing that agentic AI is going to be good at is pulling together data from multiple sources and reconciling them. So when you're looking at fraud, you're often looking at, let's just take an identity document. You're looking at like the metadata associated with that ID document. Yep. When was it created? What are some of the updates that may have taken place to it? What file formats might it be in? That's one set. So looking at the text in the metadata. The second part is the image itself. One of our customers was in the office last week telling us about how they're starting to see a lot more synthetic identities, but a human could always verify it because their words exactly were like the eyes looked a little off when it's a deep fake, like they look like Gollum. And I was like, okay, a human could look at that. So it's a visual element that might be helpful. The third part is like, who's submitting that document? Who's submitting that ID? What do we know about that entity? Could we do a little incremental research on the person that's submitting that ID? Are they a trustworthy individual? Are they on any list that we should know about? That's like a third component of it. And fourth, I think I'm always a big fan of device intelligence is very helpful, like pulling together all the information you know about the device. So I say 4 different categories there because they're not novel categories. We're already looking at them today, but we don't really pull them together well because they're all in different formats. Some might be text, some might be image, some might be open source research. That's what you might call unstructured data. Pulling it together and structuring it is what language models and agents are very good at. Sometimes I like to think about agents don't reinvent the wheel. They're not going to create these novel processes that you've never seen. It's just going to be able to do them in an automated way, especially the same steps that your human team is already doing. So that's how we think about it. Not novel signals, just combining existing signals in a faster, higher throughput way.
Absolutely. Humans will remain critical, as you'd mentioned, of course, with looking at said deepfakes. But when we're looking at millions and we're looking at, let's say, real attacks where, let's say, hundreds of thousands of documents with fake users and bots are being filtered through different systems, it can be very difficult for, of course, maintaining customer trust, but also maintaining operational standards of efficiency as well. The automation increases. What is the role of the human in the loop, in your opinion? We can't automate it all. I think that's what you've sort of clarified as well.
The role of the human in the loop is just become more and more and more important over time. Today, if you talk to any fraud leader or compliance leader, they will acknowledge that a lot of their operational teams are spending their time on data collection or data processing, right?
Right.
That's what agents are going to be very good at. Sometimes I think agents are going to be like paralegals, and it turns every investigator into a lawyer. So rather than going out and compiling all this information and doing all this research, they can come in and redline, make decisions, connect dots that the paralegal may have missed, and ultimately make a decision faster. And the key part here is really putting humans into the spot where they can do work that they're uniquely positioned to do, which is reasoning type tasks that are focused on decision making, because that's ultimately where humans are really exceptional. Every single investigator we speak to, hates how much manual work they need to do. I've never met someone who's like, nope, I have a great process. I'm not dissatisfied with my process at all. It's always this situation where they have to go through all this bodies of work to do the things that they love. And we're excited for agents to help them jump to the things that they love.
I think the right balance, as you've well put it as well, is letting AI handle and streamline the routine checks, the triage, while the humans focus on the edge cases. But of course, when we're mentioning, let's say, the actual person making the decisions, the accountability actually has to be on the human within the loop, right? Which, of course, regulators increasingly expect. And, of course, you cannot take a agentic AI to court just as much as you can take a Tesla for choosing one person over the other in terms of, let's say, a car crash, etc., right? What would be your opinion here? I mean, decisions shouldn't be part of this little black box, but as you mentioned, agentic AI can be fully accountable as there is a full log of its decision-making.
Good question. So I think today what we're largely seeing our teams do, we work with primarily large enterprises, Fortune 500s, regulated industries. They're using humans to make decisions at the end of the day. And that's a great spot to start for most organizations. If we fast forward out about 3 years, I'm pretty confident that they're going to be using agents for more decision-making of lower risk tasks. And we've been using AI in models to make decisions in the world of fraud and financial crime for a very long time. It's not a novel concept, right? When Sumsub does IDV of a given customer, they're making a decision on whether or not we should even look at that ID, right? That's a very common thing. And the way we got comfort with using technologies like that for those types of decisionings is this process of model validation and governance and model risk management, right? Now, no technology is perfect, but so long as we understand the inputs, the outputs, how the model was constructed, what are the limitations, what are the risks that we need to continue checking, you can feel fairly comfortable using that in a production setting. And so today, most teams are using agents for helping in decision-making, making them much faster in their investigations. But I'm very confident in 2 to 3 years, once we have a little bit more understanding of how the technologies work, we understand their risks, we can then use them for more decision-making style tasks on lower risk activities. I'll give you a really simple example that I'm pretty confident on, and we're starting to see that trend take place, is handling things like PEP and adverse media alerts, right? Everyone on this, who's listening to this, who has dealt with those know how repetitive and perhaps low risk some of those can be. That's a great use case for agents because they can help you sort through that and ultimately only flag the ones that need human intention. And so that's where we're going. But today, humans are in the loop for most of the tasks that agents are tackling.
Great to hear. It sounds like, of course, with your previous work within the same remit, let's say at Meta, you've built these ideas around making what was your past self's life much easier, right? I mean, from your experience as well, Will, having built tools, of course, within institutions and then working on AML products before founding Greenlite, as we'd mentioned. I mean, what does the day-to-day look like for a risk and compliance officer working with Agentic AI? What was the problem that you couldn't solve back then for yourself, but are solving now for everyone else in the market? And if you were advising, let's say, your past self or someone within the industry now, what should their, let's say, compliance program actually include?
Oh, great questions. Okay, so let's talk about just like what was the status quo that I recall, right? So every morning, an investigator would wake up in the morning. They have this like new queue of things that they need to investigate on top of their queue from the past day that they didn't get a chance to complete. Inside of a queue, you often have like this fraud investigation needs to take place, or hey, these transactions look suspicious from an AML perspective. Essentially a tip. And then they have to go start compiling information. They'll go compile all this documentation and data and whatnot. They might start analyzing some of that data, open up Excel, trying to create some pivot tables. They're doing that data collection, that data processing. Once they've assembled it all into one spot or multiple spots, they can then start to think about decision making and working through those and closing them out. Once they make that decision, they then have to write their narrative to close it out in an auditable and good quality way. And that's generally what the workflow looks like. And then, of course, you get to the end of the day, you haven't finished your queue, so you're carrying another one on for the next day. It can be a pretty intense grind. And it's why there's such high churn in our industry of fraud and compliance. It's a very aggressive pace for a lot of those teams. Cool. So looking at a team that uses Greenlight or AI agents more broadly,
Right.
Imagine how you wake up in the morning and that same queue has been pre-worked from an agent. All that data collection has taken place. A lot of that baseline analysis, those pivot tables have been made. Those researches, those reviews of those website have been completed. That packet is now sitting on your desk. That's pretty exciting as an idea. One of our customers described it as you can never go back to the old world of doing things once you've started to have an agent help you with your investigation. So you jump in, you have this packet on your desk. You're like, okay, cool. I noticed that Tom made these weird transactions to Will. Is that within our risk tolerance? And you might say, yeah, that is, and that's okay, and we can move that on. That's where we can focus much more on decision making. And so that's how we generally think about it.
Because fraudsters never stand still, or of course, that's what we like to say, how do you keep each AI agent current and ready to take on the latest scams, ploys, and of course, maneuvers that they have to actually defraud both users, businesses, and surpass regulators as well as technology?
Yeah. So one thing that's cool about agents is they'll actually slot fairly well into existing programs. So let's go back to how does a team currently keep things current, right? Every now and then, they have a quality assurance and a quality control team reviewing how teams are doing those fraud investigations. And they might notice gaps. Hey, this didn't account for this new typology that we're seeing. And they might identify that gap, and then they have a training program against it, right? Hey, we're seeing this new vector emerge. Let's talk about it. Here's how to spot it. Here's what you should do in that situation. You're effectively updating the operating procedures to handle these incremental threats that you're seeing. But you only get to be in that spot when you are observing how an investigator is currently tackling a given investigation. So again, I'm saying this quality assurance, quality control piece becomes even more important in a world of agents.
Yes, yeah.
Because you'll still identify things that are taking place, new vectors, and it's up to the humans to decide how do we want to investigate that. Again, if you have more time and you're not doing this administrative work, you're going to have more time to think about how do I want to investigate these emerging typologies? And that's where I think a lot of fraud professionals need to be spending more time. Not because for lack of trying, they just don't have the capacity to do so today. If they had the ability to say, here's how I want to investigate these synthetic identities, here's the incremental tools we want to be doing or using, that allows you to actually update your policies and your standard operating procedures. So that's generally the workflow we see. QA and QC teams review investigations, figure out the different incremental mitigations, teach the agents on how to use the incremental tools and mitigations, and the flywheel continues such that you can focus on more proactive risk mitigation rather than just executing your operating procedures.
Most definitely. And of course, AI agents can't be trained just on, let's say, retrospective data. It needs to be continuous. But according to our Sumsub 2025 European Financial Services report, approximately 51% of fintech professionals say that keeping up with regulations is their biggest challenge, with 44% citing high operational costs as well. So the big question for you today, Will, is Agentic AI a breakthrough or another layer of complexity for compliance teams to work on day to day?
The short answer is yes, it's kind of both. So on one side, it's a breakthrough in that it will give teams more capacity to focus on proactive work. So I'm a big believer that interpretation of guidelines, keeping up with the pace is something that, frankly, someone inside of an organization is going to be best positioned to handle. And this is where a lot of that skilled knowledge work that fraud and risk and compliance professionals do will really shine. And so whenever I talk to compliance and risk leaders, this is the main thing I tell them to focus on. How do you figure out the best path for your institution to chart? So there is what Agentic AI, it's a breakthrough in that it will help give more capacity to focus on these types of questions. And I think that's what we're really excited about because, again, at Greenlight, we focus on solving operational challenges such that you don't have to think about operational challenges as much. You can think about policy challenges, which I think are the right things, more big brain things to be thinking about. That's one side. However, it is also using a new technology. And anyone in this field knows that when you use new technology, there's incremental risks that you need to manage, and there's incremental controls and oversight you need to put in place.
Yes.
Now, fortunately, that would be challenging if that was just, there was no benefit. Fortunately, we've just freed up a lot of capacity on the operational side, right? We now have people who would love to do that. What we often see in teams that we work with is you're taking some of these investigators and turn them into essentially technology leaders, right? How do you oversee the AI? How do you make sure that it's using the same policies? How do you continue to tune it over time? If we weren't freeing up capacity, if agents weren't freeing capacity in the operational side, this would be a very challenging technology to adopt. But because that is taking place, you have the ability to add in those resources and those controls to manage those risks that you might be seeing.
Most definitely. And I think following asking you, of course, whether or not agentic AI is a breakthrough, there also needs to, of course, be a breakthrough in trust and inherently governance of that for the market and regulators to adopt it at scale across the board, right? Or are you seeing that breakthrough happen already and, let's say, enterprise businesses actually adopting this with the utmost trust and belief that it is going to solve day-to-day problems for the coming, of course, years?
The short answer is we're already seeing teams adopt this at scale. We work with several public companies and federally regulated banks who are all using this type of technology in production today. And you might wonder, how can they do this? This is a new technology. How do they feel comfortable? The general thought here is that we've been using AI, air quotes AI, for across those different categories of AI we described earlier for a long time. People have been using models for a very, very long time. And that means we already have a lot of the controls, validation, and governance processes that we need. So if I were to, let's say, use a new transaction monitoring system, I know exactly how I would validate that system, how I'd put governance in place of that system, and again, what kind of controls I might put in place. The same thing happens with agents. They're a new set of models, right? We know how to use new models. We know what controls we need to put in place here. The risks might be slightly different because they're processing a different task, but ultimately we know how to do model validation, governance, and controls. So that's what we're seeing. Teams are applying the same process that they have against these new systems. I like to say, don't, just because AI is a new technology, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You already have great controls in place. Just continue to apply that to this new technology. Sometimes I think maybe it's in the media interest to hype up this technology is completely different thing, and that's not the case. It's just a new set of models for us to be using in our fight against financial crime and fraud. And the other part that I think everyone is recognizing is the bad guys already have access to this, and they've been using this for a long time at this point. So you're falling very far behind if you cannot adopt this technology to keep up with those fraud losses and those risks that are being generated through this type of AI.
So the question is then, will regulators actually ever accept AI first compliance embedded throughout the macro, let's say, field of every industry around the world, financial, regulated industries, within banking, fintech, and even, of course, within the ever so more regulated crypto industry as well?
So if you look at it in a vacuum, it might seem like a crazy concept. Why would we accept this new technology? But if you look at it in the broader picture of financial services, it's never been more costly to run a financial institution. The regulation continues to go up. And what does this mean? We're seeing it's very hard for smaller institutions to compete with the big ones. And so we're seeing this lack of competition, where regulators are, especially here, we're in the US right now, are seeing this lack of competition being a concern. It's a systematic concern for the health of the financial system. And so if regulators want to encourage competition, want to encourage diversity in where assets are stored and how they're used, you need to be able to allow the smaller institutions to operate at scale. And so if you put that backdrop against it, what are some of the tools that these smaller financial institutions might have? They might be able to adopt technology or automation to increase their leverage much more than a Barclays who can throw more people at the problem, right? And I think that's really exciting. And so again, if you're just looking in the vacuum, probably not. But if you look at it in the overall competitive landscape of financial institutions today, you really need to encourage that innovation such that smaller institutions can compete with the large ones. We think automation is just going to be one of the major levers for doing so. And I'm very optimistic that regulators will recognize this and see this as a great tool to increase the stability of the financial institutions.
So before we move on to the next question, I wanted to take a moment for a little behind the scenes update here at Sumsub. A couple of months ago, we celebrated our 10-year anniversary. 10 years of verifying the world. Over that time, we've grown stronger, faster, smarter, and kept pace with an ever-changing fraud landscape, from fake documents to deep fakes and beyond. As part of that evolution, we've upgraded our case management solution, the hub where AML, fraud, KYC, and compliance teams run their investigations. And at the center of this upgrade is Summy AI, our own AI assistant built to help teams work faster and more efficiently. Summy gives investigators a clear summary of each case, pulling together user background, transaction history, even behavioral insights, and then suggests smart next steps. And in practice, that means saving time, cutting through the noise, and helping teams make faster, sharper decisions. We'll link more about Summy in the show notes, but it's a big step forward in combining 10 years of experience with the new wave of Agentic AI. Welcome back, Will. So, AI will make mistakes. That much is certain, I think. The question is, for the podcast today, what risks does that create, and how do we limit them, especially in highly regulated sectors, let's say, such as fintech, banking, where AML and risk, of course, officers carry significant responsibility and face heavy penalties from regulators, even for minor compliance errors. Can we alleviate some of that responsibility, or is it still going to be on these individuals to trust AI to complete a job which they have previously, let's say historically, been doing within their profession?
So I think as we help teams roll out this agentic AI solutions, about 80% of the controls, validation, and governance you have in place is similar to what you have in your past models world. So again, continue to use the systems you have in place for putting in controls, adding in governance structures, and managing risks. Like that will cover a lot, because again, agentic AI, ignore the hype of the media and whatnot. It is broadly another tool. It's another model to help us with incremental tasks. So again, use the things you already have in place. Don't have to start from ground zero to use this type of technology. So bring those over. What's the 20% that's different? Now, the interesting thing, agentic AI and generative AI have the common feature of the outputs are not as predictable as a traditional supervised machine learning answer. So if you ask, I don't know, let's say you ask ChatGPT, tell me a joke 4 different times, it'll tell you 4 different jokes. This goes back to what we need to be assessing for like the success of these models is the directional correctness. And in that example, did it tell you a joke? And the answer is yes. You might have a second thing of like, how funny is the joke, but that's completely a secondary concept. It's really like, did it do the job that it needed to do? So when Greenlite is helping teams close out, let's say, a PEP or an adverse media alert, the investigation will look similar every time, but the spirit will be roughly the same. It'll be the same answer on the other side of it. And that's what we need to be doing, checking for kind of the spirit of the answer and the direction of the answer versus the exact words. So that's one novel introduction there. The second thing that I'll call out here is, having worked on machine learning systems for most of my career, the way you do testing inside of a agentic system is quite different from how you do it in a traditional transaction monitoring or machine learning prospect.
And how's that, Will?
So in machine learning, generally what you're doing here is you're having a lot of test data that you pump in and expect the same outputs on the other side. And then you need to be able to understand how every transformation took place. That's pretty much it. So it's input and outputs. Now with Agentic, you need to check how every step is done, because there's variation at every step. Going back to like my joke kind of thing. Every prompt can be a little bit different. And so in the world of Agentic, you actually have to use these concepts called evaluations, evals, and benchmarking to make sure that the quality of a response is really good. I'll give you a very specific example. One of the common things that Greenlight does is reviews websites, right? For what is the nature of this business? Do they look fraudulent, et cetera? And so what we have is a list of like websites that are fraudulent and are, correct. And we consistently run that benchmark through the system to see if it continues to get the right answers, because we always make changes and improvements there. So it's really like having those benchmarks in place to make sure incremental things you launch to the model or improvements you make continue to perform really well. And the second thing here is this is a good example in that every company probably reviews a website slightly differently. So how do you make sure that you have the company specific logic inside of your model? That's kind of a new-ish concept here. Whereas when you ask the AI to evaluate the AI itself in an evaluation, you might have, okay, for my specific institution, I care about these 16 things as well. Also check for these 16 things. So what I'm essentially saying here is the structure of testing is a little different because you need prompt level evaluations in place. And any platform that you're working with that is, worth its weight in whatever the expression is, salt. I don't know what you're worth your weight in, but if any organization that's really strong will have those types of evaluations in place. So always ask the providers that you're working with, how do you do testing of your agentic system? Tell me more about your eval strategy. Tell me about how you do benchmarking. How can I trust the results? They should be able to answer this one for you.
Some amazing points there, Will. I think you've taught me a lot just then. I think we've discussed a lot of the upside, of course, the benefit, the breakthroughs that could take place and what would need to happen if so. I mean, do you believe there will actually be a day where humans or compliance professionals as well won't be needed, let's say, in compliance with AI and artificial agents, artificial intelligence, agentic AI in play? I mean, you've said that humans are still very much important for the decision making. You've said they're very much important, of course, for the responsibility outlook as well. But of course, there are paralegals which need to work through that scope of work to become lawyers or trainee lawyers, and then to partners. Right? You're removing a big scope of work at the bottom of the, let's say, the ladder, where of course a lot of the training and intelligence and information gathering experiences for a lot of new compliance professionals as well.
I can confidently say that there's going to be a very bright future for compliance and risk and fraud professionals because we've already seen this story before. Like, this isn't the first time a technology shift has taken place, and it's not even the first technology shift that's affected financial services. I'm always reminded of like the rollout of ATMs when people said, they have these ATMs, there's never going to be a bank teller ever again, because why would you ever do that?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And fast forward to where we are now, there's more bank tellers than there were at the introduction of ATMs. Why is that? Those bank tellers are now just spending more time on specialized services. They might be helping an especially specific population like the elderly access the same tools an ATM might do. They might be focused on advisory or routing them to the right person inside of the institution. They might be focused on better customer success, and they can actually spend more time with every individual client that comes to them because other ones can just go straight to the ATM. That exact same thing is going to happen in compliance, risk, and fraud. I would just say, like, fraud is not going anywhere. It's just getting more and more rampant. And AI is going to help us in that fight by taking some of the grunt work off the table, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be incremental fraud vectors that need to be solved. Going back to like how almost this question that you're alluding to, which I think is very interesting, is like, for new people entering the field, how can they enter it without the training grounds that might exist there? This goes to where I think we need to build up more specialized training programs, focused less on the operations. Like, here's your SOPs, go execute your SOPs.
Right.
And instead focus on those skilled things that we've talked about in this conversation. Hey, here's how you would want to interpret FCA requirements based off where we are as an institution. Hey, here's how you want to conduct quality control and quality assurance. Almost training them towards different things. It's definitely in our remit. We know how to do these things. That's ultimately where, if you can set up, like, let's say a new grad fraud specialist with these types of skills at the baseline, they're going to be very successful across their career.
Most definitely. Well, I have one final question before we move on to the outro here, Will, today. I mean, as more companies, such as your clients and partners, will be adopting agentic AI under the banner of course, compliance, what's the single most practical way you see it being used moving forward? What's the next natural step in the evolution of agentic AI for compliance, fraud, and to stop those dishonest fraudsters from getting their way?
Yeah, I think there's still so much work to be done on the like L1 layer of fraud, risk, and compliance, which is broadly that triage layer.
Right.
If you ask any financial crime or fraud professional, what is the number one thing that is keeping your team occupied? It's like false positives. Those investigations that don't need to be reviewed, and they'd love to double down on the ones that are truly suspicious. I still think there's a lot of work to do there. We spend a lot of our time in that area, and so we're excited to continue to extend the number of L1 investigations we could do. That's the immediate thing that everyone should be using. I anticipate in like 2 to 3 years, every financial institution will have this triage layer in place, driven by agents, to increase the scale and leverage of their organization, and honestly promote kind of happier employees as well, because then they don't have to deal with all those false positives.
Well, that's a big commitment, and I love to see it. Absolutely. I think what you're, of course, trying to solve within the industry is going to make a lot of lives easier and put a lot of people into a position of confidence with the businesses that they entrust with their financials and other means and resources, but also help people stay safe from fraudsters, which at the end of the day is what we're trying to do. But to close things out, as we usually do on the What the Fraud podcast, Will, we always like to have a little bit of fun at the end. 5 quick fire questions, of course, so no overthinking. Are you up for it?
Love it. Let's do it.
Wonderful. If you could ban one risky online behavior, Will, forever, what would it be?
I'm going to get in trouble for this one, but like online gambling can be crazy how little IDV verifications you need to access the amount of capital you can move. So that's going to be one of them.
It is, absolutely. And have you ever been a victim of fraud yourself? Is that also tied to the online gambling?
I fortunately have not yet. Let's knock on wood, but it's not happened to me yet.
Good to hear. I think you're one of the first which it hasn't actually on our podcast today. So what's one fraud myth you wish would disappear?
Ooh, wow. That's a challenging one. I think the one that I hope it disappears the most is that young people who are technology savvy think they're immune to it because they know how to spot very obvious fraud vectors. They have no concept like account takeovers really taking place or identities being stolen. So I think people are lured into a false sense of confidence because they think that they know technology and how to spot scams. They really don't. They're much more sophisticated.
Definitely. The second follow-up to that, I guess. So which type of fraud do you think will grow the fastest in the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's got to be identity theft and or the use of deepfakes for identity documentation. Again, some of our customers are reporting entire companies, documents, IDs are all fabricated. It's really hard to know, and their current systems can't catch those. So very confident that's it. I often think the fraud vectors will be lockstep with the technology improvements of the time. And right now, generating documents and images has never been easier. And people like deepfakes have never been easier. So I'm terrified by that vector, but I think that's something we need to all be fighting in this industry.
We should all be fighting it together, and they're going to keep on releasing more and more models, democratizing access and cheaper, let's say, sell-side solutions for these deepfakes and synthetic images. And of course, yeah, we just need to keep up the arms race, basically. But Will, if you could have any other career other than the one you're currently in, what would it be? And I feel like this is a terrible question because you seem very happy in the role that you're currently in.
I am enjoying it. I love this right now. Honestly, being an investigator sounds really exciting, like a high-level investigator working on complex criminal activities. I have so much respect. I'm awe-inspired by some of the investigators we get a chance to work with. They're some of the hardest working, kindest professionals I've ever got a chance to work with. And the toolkits that they have available to them, the mental gymnastics they are able to go through is just so amazing. I'd love to be able to learn some of those things.
Amazing to hear. And of course, they're going to be doing even better now that they have Agentic AI by their side, working on some of the cases with them as well.
Hey, let's hope so. I completely agree.
Thank you for joining us. Very happy to, of course, speak about some of the interesting topics and take a glimpse into the future of what the role and, of course, life of a compliance expert, a fraud analyst may be in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Great to have Will on this week's episode of What the Fraud, discussing some really, really important topics. But a very important thing about Agentic AI is it won't be coming for day-to-day jobs of those working within the compliance sector. I mean, Agentic AIs agents can flag anomalies at scale, round up decisioning, but humans remain a critical input when making judgments for customer care or otherwise. I mean, the right balance is letting AI handle routine checks, triage, while humans focus on the edge cases, the disputes, and the regulatory interpretation. Having a human, of course, in the loop also provides accountability, which regulators increasingly expect, ensuring decisions aren't just a black box. We are looking at, of course, a brighter future with the use of AI to fight fraudsters at their own game, whilst making sure decision making within compliance is streamlined, accurate, but also compliant with business procedures and regulators. Join us next time on What the Fraud as we look at how scammers are stepping up their game in the fintech world and how educating customers has to be one of the first defenses when it comes to fighting cyber criminals. Next time, I'm really excited to have two heavyweights from the industry with me, Jesse Apple and Aaron Wilson from Wise. If you've enjoyed today's chat with Will, make sure to hit follow wherever you get your podcasts. And if you can leave us a review, we'd love to hear your thoughts. It, of course, helps more people find the show and learn how to avoid the latest scams. Remember, if you want to hear more about what we do here at Sumsub and how your business can actually benefit from our verification services, definitely check out our website at www.sumsub.com and subscribe to our socials. Indeed, stay safe and see you next time.